Welcome back to the pursuit of progress. Benjamin Adams here with Adam Lang, my co host. And today we are going to be following up on our conversation from last week where I shared about an incredible story as far as how I dealt with adversity in my life, physical adversity. And today, Adam is going to share a story of his from a near death experience that he had in Costa Rica a couple of years ago. Really excited to hear what you have to share today, Adam, and kind of give us an idea and a background of what we're going to be talking about.
What is up, everybody? Hope you guys are having a great week. And as Ben said, thanks for joining in again on another episode of The Pursuit of Progress.
The pursuit of progress.
So, Ben had a really valuable story last week on Diesel Day, which is, if you guys haven't had a chance, make sure you guys go back and listen to that episode about this 24-hour just fitness and mental and physical fitness challenge. I have never had an experience quite like that myself, but thought I would share a story that was similar in the sense of a very, very scary, challenging experience where I was in a similar mindset where, wasn't sure what was going to happen and just pushed kind of to my limits, both physically and mentally. So that's what I'm going to share today. And this is from a trip that I did back probably about 10 years ago now with another friend that Ben and I both went to high school with named Nick Sorrentino. And I guess I'll just kind of give you guys a little bit of a quick background on what this hike, this adventure that we did was, and then Ben, you can kind of talk through things a little bit more.
And so you were in a national park in Costa Rica, right, called Corcovado?
Yeah, so this is actually the second time that I had been down to Corcovado. Corcovado is on the southwestern peninsula of Costa Rica, so it borders Panama. And I did this trip with another friend of mine right after college. We did a big backpacking trip through all of Central and South America. And back in the day, this was 20 years ago, before the internet where it's at today, a lot of our research on where to go on these different trips fell down to just like, buying a Lonely Planet type book that just had, different trips and just recommendations within these travel books. And that's how I initially learned about Corcovado. But Corcovado is very famous from a biologist type the people that are just in the kind of the research world. It's kind of claim to fame as it's known as the most biodiverse place on the planet. And it's basically just a very, very pure part of the jungle where there is, very few humans, very natural, tons of wildlife, both wildlife that is exciting to see, but also some that are very scary and just things that I had never really experienced before. A couple examples of that would be, different types of spiders and snakes. There's what's known as the bushmaster down there, which is a pretty large snake that hangs out in the canopy of trees and actually kind of attacks from above, which is a whole nother dynamic for snakes. But more so than that is actually the fer-de-lance. I'm not sure the correct way to say that, but it's actually the snake that kills more people than any other snake in the world. And the snake, the fer-de-lance, is most prevalent of anywhere in the world, in specifically Corcovado and this area called the Darien province, which is basically the rainforest that borders Costa Rica and Panama. There's a lot of drug smuggling that goes on down there, and it's this very just difficult place to navigate and be in, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of drugs are smuggled in that area, is just because nobody else, the DEA, nobody else wants to be down there and even in this environment. So
I was going to say that when you're talking about, very intense biodiversity, I was going to ask if that's a scientific way of saying dangerous or extremely dangerous.
It's definitely a very intense place, but I love that about it because it truly is an area that is unlike what you're used to living in Colorado or just, in a developed country
Yeah.
like the United States, which was such a treat to be down there. It's about 164 square miles. And this hike specifically that we did is very, I think, famous in in a small circle of people that are very into photography and research and all that kind of stuff. But you take this hike that borders the ocean, and you get to what's known as the La Serena Ranger Station. So it's not even a resort or any sort of hotel, anything like that. You're in a national park, and you just basically have to get a permit to even enter the park. And then you can, basically stay at this ranger station, which very few tourists are even there. It's really just students and people that are there for research purposes. So it was very, random way that I even stumbled across this place in the first place. But we did this trip. So long story short, we did this trip in 2005 and had a great experience. It was myself and a different friend of mine named Sam, and had a great time. Very, very just special experience, to the point of wanting to share this with my buddy Nick when we went down to Costa Rica, several years later. So giving you guys a little bit of that backstory, just so you understand kind of where this is and how we even found this place. But before
some of the snakes that you're describing, so are these venomous snakes, and the spiders? I mean, are they venomous?
Yeah, no, the fertile ants is extremely venomous, and it's a very small black snake that's only about, maybe 18 inches to maybe 36 inches. I mean, it's a very small snake, very inconspicuous. To be honest, it looks just like a tree root. So the reason it's so dangerous is a lot of people step on them. They're very hard to see, but also they're very, very aggressive and territorial. And since you're in an environment that has very few people, you're kind of in their world, so very, very dangerous snake. And if you do get bit, you have a very short period of time to get the proper antibodies and, the anti-venom to have a chance at surviving.
That is intense.
Yeah, so I'll kind of give you guys a little bit more of this story, and Ben, feel free to interrupt me and stop me at any point. But in order to get down to this area in Corcovado, again, I mentioned it's a national park, so this isn't a touristy type place like you would find a Rocky Mountain National Park or Yosemite, where there's tons of people. This was very, very off the beaten path, and in a part of the country of Costa Rica that is very challenging just to even get to. So when we went on this trip, we were forced to basically take, just small buses and, public transportation to get down even to the village that bordered the entrance to the park. So just to get down to this entrance took us almost 2 days. So we were very committed just to even get to do this hike. What happened is basically because of these different bus schedules and just the timing that we were forced to just kind of, abide by whatever schedule they had is what we were, forced to take. The buses dropped us off at the beach, where we then had to hike about 2 miles just on this very secluded beach to the entrance to the park. And we got dropped off much later than it would have ideally, been for our timing of all this. So we didn't even get dropped off until almost noon, which put us at this entrance to the ranger station at, I think it was about maybe 1:30 in the afternoon. It was also a off and on torrential downpour weather this day, and we just had to keep moving forward and just committing to doing this. There wasn't any really option to turn around and stay at the hotel or something else nearby, because there's nothing out there where we were. So
when you get to the trailhead, it sounds like it took 2 days to get down there to the village. You get down there a little bit later than you were anticipating. It's raining out. It's 1:30 p.m. Kind of what is your mindset? And then also, what was the plan for the hike? Is this going to be like an overnight hike? Are you going to be camping out, or is this going to be something that you're going to try and do like out and back the same day?
Yep. No, it was the plan was to camp at this ranger station. They provided, some of the accommodations there. The first time I did this hike, we actually brought our tents and sleeping bags and truly camped there. However, they also have some bunk bed type rooms for these research people that are there. And that's what we ended up doing on this second trip. So we just had a large day bag with water and food for a few days. Our goal was to stay out there. I believe it was for 2 nights. It was like a 3-day, 2-night type trip. When we got to the entrance to the park, the ranger was a very, older, no English, only speaking Spanish, and basically was very direct with us on, you're not allowed to enter this park right now. You're too late. It's raining. You don't know where you're going. He just had several different objections to us continuing, and we were pretty stubborn and kind of kept pushing back. And I kept using the excuse of, I've done this before. I know this hike. I know this trail. And after probably 30 minutes of negotiating, he eventually agreed to let us go. And looking back, even right there, just how dumb that was of us to not take him seriously and abide by his guidance of don't keep going, don't continue on right now. I remember, even this is almost probably 10, 15 years now. I can't remember what year we did this trip, but I can still remember even just this guy, this old Costa Rican guy, just his face that he had when we were continuing on, and just seeing his, I think, level of legitimate concern for us. This was at a time where cell phones didn't really exist out here. There wasn't any sort of emergency response that we had on us to let somebody know if we were in trouble. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have anything. So we were just out there, just totally at the mercy of the jungle. So this hike, it's about I think it's about a 10-mile hike one way to get to eventually get to this La Serena ranger station. And it basically just borders the coast. So you're just following this beautiful ocean, very desolate, remote part of the jungle. So you're in the jungle a little bit, but then you'll come out to the ocean and have sections that are kind of just, following the beach. And then you go back kind of a little bit more interior into the jungle at times. So I, remembered the basics of this hike, and I knew that towards the end of the hike, right before you get to the ranger station, there's also a large river that there's actually a couple different sections of river that you have to cross. I'll talk more about that here in a minute. But we got started on the hike, continuing to rain, having a good time though. We're just, moving forward and making it happen. Probably about a third of the way into the hike, however, there's a section that it forces you come up to some pretty large cliffs, and you have to go along the beach around this large section of land that is butting up to the ocean. So rather than being in the jungle, you have to get, down on the sand and just basically navigate around these cliffs to get back to the other side where the trail continues from there. We, get to this point. It's probably about 5 p.m. at this point. So we've already, probably about, 3 hours into our journey. And unfortunately, there's a section here and another section towards the end where you have to time the hike with the tides. So when it's high tide, it's impossible to continue on this path and keep moving forward. You basically are at the discretion of tide, waiting for it to at least get back enough where you can then get around these bends. And our timing was not correct. And I honestly never even thought about that before when we got started on the hike that day. I forgot about that aspect of timing it with the tides. So Nick and I, we started kind of go around this bend and just start getting absolutely hammered with waves, very sharp rocks. We got, maybe about a third of the way around this bend and just realized that, this is super dangerous. We got to turn around. It was not only just bashing us up against the rocks, we were actually also feeling an intense amount of current just with it trying to pull us out to sea. And we just realized, we need to, pull an audible here and turn around and just get back and regroup and figure out what our next move is. So we turned around, got back onto shore, pouring rain again at this point, and just realized that we just have to wait.
Let me ask you a quick question.
Yep.
So at this point, are you kind of give us a description, if you can, your walk, are you up against the rocks and kind of the cliff hang while the tide in the ocean is coming in and you're kind of getting hit by the tide up against the cliff or the rocks. Is that kind of what you're describing?
Yeah, just getting bashed to the point of we can't keep going. It was like we got to turn around. So we got back onto shore, onto the land, maybe 15, 20 feet up from where the waves were crashing, and far enough out of that danger zone where we just found some canopy and just kind of hunkered down in the rain and just talked about what our next best move was. And we decided it really was just waiting for the tide to go back out enough where this part of the trail would be a little bit more easily navigable and we could continue moving on around this bend along the beach. So we ended up having to wait for probably 2-3 hours. I remember we both kind of just took a nap. And when it finally was at a point where we felt confident we could, give this another attempt, it was not dark, but it was getting to be dusk and we still had a long way to go. So we, move on forward. At this point, I think the rain died down for a bit too, which was nice. And we were able to get around this bend and kind of continue on with our hike. Within about 30 minutes, though, it became very, very dark. We're in a part of the world here where there is no, light outside of just Mother Nature. There's no obviously city lights in the distance or anything. It was pitch black, very, very dark, especially with the weather being pretty rainy. It was cloudy. There wasn't any stars or the moon wasn't out. It was dark. And we did have headlamps, but what basically was happening now is the trail, as opposed to being on the ocean, there was a significant section here that went inland into the rainforest and into the jungle. And we were at a point where we would be on the path and all of a sudden that path would just end. And then we would realize we weren't on a path. We were actually just on a game trail. A game trail is basically just where different wildlife that lives in the jungle, they all kind of formulate their own little paths and use the same areas to get around. And we were on some of those paths. Those paths were created by an animal called a tapir, Tapir, which is basically like a giant cow, but it has a really big snout, almost like a miniature elephant. Bizarre creature. We saw a bunch of these wild tapir out there, which is such a cool animal to see. They're not very dangerous, but tons of different types of monkeys and all kinds of stuff. A lot of jaguar actually is also one of the most prevalent areas for wild jaguar out there. So knowing all of this and then being on these trails that are just all of a sudden disappearing and realizing we're not on the trail, that was pretty disheartening. That first part where we had to wait for the tide, that was, a knock on my confidence level, but, still moving forward. By the time we started really running into these issues with the trail just kind of disappearing out of nowhere, that was when, on my end, I really started to just get beat down even further. And my confidence was at a pretty low point. And just physically, I was dealing with a lot of just pain in my back. I had a nerve issue with my back that I was dealing with, just, being up against some trying times. And him and I both, Nick and I, just kind of, taking it out on each other a little bit and just also both being, just scared, exhausted, all those things.
I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes and, you're out in the middle of the jungle. There's no light. There's no resources other than what you might have on you. You've already gotten beaten down with some of the waves. You got a late start on the hike. And then it was further delayed by the issue with the tide. And so I'm just imagining you being in the middle of the dark in a really dangerous jungle, trying to go down a path that doesn't exist. And then all of a sudden you realize that you're not on a path. You lost the path maybe miles ago. And I'm just imagining, it's like, this is the kind of stuff they make movies about.
Yeah. So when we find out the trail wasn't the trail, we'd have to turn around and go back, backtrack to the point where we would think we were back on the trail. That whole aspect was very, very mentally trying. And then going back to this Far-de-Lance snake and also the Bushmaster snake, both of these snakes are incredibly common in this area. So you can imagine when it's dark out with your headlamp and you're not on a trail and you're stepping over branches and tree roots and all these things that look exactly like a snake does, that whole aspect in the back of my mind too, and just realizing if either of us did unfortunately get, bit or just step on the wrong thing, just what kind of trouble we would be in. I mean, it was a life or death situation from that standpoint. So anyways, back to the kind of the journey. So we, continued on, and after several times of running out of trail and, fighting through all of that stuff, we got to a section that was probably over halfway through the trail where there was a few very iconic type places in the trail that I had remembered from doing it previously. And we started to see some of that stuff, which was a breath of fresh air for me, just because I knew that we were getting closer and seeing a little bit of that progress from my prior experience. And one of those being just this section that was probably a mile or two long, where you're not on the actual sandy beach, but you're within maybe 15 or 20 feet of that, where the first little row of trees and canopy of mostly palm trees were located. Whenever possible, we were always trying to stay as close to the ocean and to the waves, just the noise of the ocean, as possible. Most snakes are very intimidated and scared by noise, and specifically water. So we knew that just by staying closer to the ocean whenever possible, the chances of, at least snakes being in that area were less than being just in the middle of the jungle. This section, though, that I'm referring to was one of the coolest experiences I had when I did this trip the first time, is my friend Sam and I actually, when we were leaving, so you take the exact same trail when you leave to get back out of this jungle. So on my first experience, when we were leaving, we got up really early in the morning. And when we got to this section that I'm talking about on the beach, we actually, took a break and walked out onto the beach when we were leaving. And there was nothing but this one set of footprints in front of us that we found, because the ocean hadn't come up high enough up to wash away the footprints from the night before. But they were just these perfect jaguar footprints in the sand that we saw the first time we were there. So just realizing that on top of everything else, there are these, 600-700 pound jaguars all around us that are probably, within feet of us at times, and we just don't even realize. But I just was kind of remembering about that experience when we were doing this the second time. That was one of those kind of iconic sections of the trail that, came back to me when we were doing this in the pitch black darkness of night.
And were you having flashbacks to the ranger at that point who said, "Don't go on the trail"?
Yeah. Definitely, he kept popping in my head, that's for sure. So, I don't know what time it is at this point, but it's definitely, at an hour where we should have already been to the ranger station by now. They didn't have cell phones, but they did have some landline where basically it sounds like that ranger that we were joking about, he did let the ranger station know that these two Americans were, coming. The fact that we hadn't arrived yet, I think that this ranger station was starting to get also pretty concerned. I'll talk more about that here in a minute, but we were at an hour where we already should have been there, and we were just kind of on borrowed time at this point. So the last kind of challenge of this hike, and I think the one that probably was the most intimidating and scary for me, and what really took a lot of just took a lot of courage to kind of get through, is I mentioned that at the very end of this hike, to get to this ranger station, there was a couple of sections where you had to cross a river or a stream. And these are also very dependent on the tides. So when it's high tide, meaning that the ocean is basically coming into the jungle, instead of a 1 foot, shallow creek that you could just walk across, it turns into a 5, 6, 7 foot deep, full on, river, a stream that is pretty legitimate. They call that brackish water, which is basically this combination of fresh water and salt water. So when the ocean tide comes in, it creates this brackish water environment, which is very, very conducive to other types of wildlife, specifically in this area, bull sharks. So what would happen is when the tide comes in, all these bull sharks come from the ocean up the stream, and they feed on caiman. So small crocodile, alligator looking creatures, they're called caiman. as well
Wow.
as, different types of fish, other just, creatures that are maybe on the shoreline. So I had known about this also previously. So we, were very cautious of crossing these streams when it was high tide, or at least high enough of a tide where these bull sharks could be coming up and in the water with us.
So you
That
have alligators or caiman, you have snakes, you have poisonous spiders, you have jaguars. And now, as you're getting ready to cross this stream due to the brackish water, you have bull sharks. And I know just from the news, I think bull sharks are responsible for the most attacks because they will come in shallow water, like you're saying.
very
Um,
aggressive.
yeah, wow.
So again, though, we just want to get to the damn ranger station, So we're trying our best to be patient and, waiting for this time for the tide to go out where it wasn't such a deep water crossing. But I mean, we were a little bit delusional at this point. Plus, we just were so focused on just getting there that we probably, against our best judgment, we tried to cross one of these streams when it was still much too high, to the point of we had our backpacks up over our heads, and we were just one in front of the other trying to just cross in different sections where we didn't know if this was a good or a bad section to try and cross at. So we had multiple times where we had to turn around because we got, maybe 100 feet across, and it started, feeling very, very strong current, like it was pulling us out. It was to the point of going above our heads. So we had a couple of times where we got, way out, totally submerged, had to turn around and come back to the shore, kind of navigate down to a different section where we thought it might be more passable, try it again. And the first time we did this, other than just the water becoming too deep and having to turn around, that was really the only scary part of it. When we went down a little bit to the second attempt, I had my headlamp on, had my backpack over my head, and then I start looking at just the horizon of the water, and all you can see everywhere are these beady little eyes, which are the caiman crocodiles, just all over. Just you wouldn't see them except for their eyes and the reflection of your headlamp. So there were not only the bull sharks, but it was verified through me seeing just how many of these caiman were all over the place. So we were on the second attempt very aware of that, and just trying to cross in places where those eyeball reflections were far enough away where we didn't think they were within striking distance. And eventually we were able to cross at not the right time. It was still probably the high tide, or at least kind of in that transition where it was, still much deeper than we should have been in the water at that point. But we eventually got across, and that was a huge relief because I knew that once we had crossed that section that we were within about a mile and we were kind of on the home stretch. So once we got to that point,
Is it still night at this point? Is the sun still down and
yeah,
no light out?
I bet this was probably about midnight at this point.
Wow, I can't imagine trying to cross a roaring river with caiman, bull sharks, uh, and no light. I mean, that sounds terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, it was several factors, and they all, in their own right, had some pretty intense concerns with them. So, but anyways, we got through that section and knew we were kind of on the home stretch. Both of us had a huge weight off of our shoulders at that point. So within probably about 30, 40 minutes, we arrived at the ranger station. The person that kind of takes care of the ranger station was up still, and came out to greet us, and was just kind of, also you could tell in his eyes, like, oh my God, what are you guys doing? We've been worried about you, all that kind of stuff. Which is just another realization of the level of danger that we were in, that we probably very naively didn't realize that, to what extent we really were in danger. So, and that's kind of the story. So we got there, and we were able to have a very, very well-deserved night of rest in a bunk bed, as opposed to sleeping in the jungle, and had a very, very just awesome experience the following day, just exploring that area. And then on the way out, we obviously were much more intentional on our timing and had a much easier, more enjoyable trip on the return when we left. But yeah, basically just wanted to kind of share that story, obviously, because it's, I think, kind of entertaining and just fun to listen to, but also just
And
because
what
that
were some
was
of
a
your
time in my
biggest
life where
takeaways,
I really was
you know,
pushed up
reflecting back,
against,
maybe even the next couple of days?
say that again.
I, I was just asking, you know, what were some of your biggest takeaways from this experience as you reflected back in the moment, and then also just in hindsight, you know, the months and years that followed? What would your advice be to, you know, just others regarding your experience here?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess first off, as a disclaimer, just be a little bit more intelligent with your planning and your execution of adventures and different trips you decide to go on. There was definitely a few, um, pivotal moments on our experience here where we should have, been a little bit more responsible, and probably, for one, not even had started the hike when we did, but also in a few of these other times throughout the actual hike itself, we probably should have just hunkered down for the evening, slept outside in the jungle, and been able to, tackle some of these sections in the daylight when we were able to assess the dangers a little bit better. But for me, yeah, it was just an experience that I think everybody in one way or another has a few experiences in their lives where they really are challenged, pushing themselves to a different kind of ability to understand, their what they're capable of. And this was one of those for me where it just, in the moment, was very intense. However, we persevered and we got through, and just realized that while we're very lucky, it was also just a great learning moment for me, just to see how capable we really are when in a time of stress and just needing to, at all costs, just kind of keep pushing forward, how we're capable of a lot more than we realize. And I've applied that just to other experiences in my life, other hikes, other trips, other things that I've done just from a recreational standpoint, but also even in business, and just challenges, that I've had in my personal life, just realizing that, pain is temporary. You just have to kind of embrace those moments when you're in them, and just understand it's very important to keep a level head, and just be kind of in a moment where you can kind of step back and just kind of assess where you're at, taking the right next steps. But it was just one of those moments where I just was not only challenged, but also afterwards just very thankful for that opportunity, and just thankful for our health and our well-being.
Yeah, I think as we have experiences like that, you also gain a lot of wisdom from those experiences. And me as a dad now, you know, I look back at my younger self, and, you know, and even not that long ago, my younger self when I was in my 20s in college, even in my 30s. And sometimes I'll just, you know, I'll reflect and say, you know what, I probably could have used, you know, some, you know, thought through this a little bit more, or used some better judgment. And now, me as a dad, it's like I want to really try and teach my kids those questions. Absolutely. Do I want them to experience that things and challenge themselves? Absolutely, I do. And push those boundaries and get out of their comfort zone. But kind of to your point here, it's like you also want to do that in a way that you're not really jeopardizing your health and safety.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that in a way that is still responsible. And I think when you are a little bit younger, we don't always take into consideration how important some of those other components and aspects are. And as a parent, when you see a child, but, you know, kind of maybe not thinking through all the things, and the potential consequences for their actions, it gives you a heavy heart.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah. Well, anyways, guys, I'm alive. It was fun. We made it through, and I live to tell the story and to live
All
another
right.
day. So, just thought
Live
that would
another
be.
day, and we're gonna have our Pursuit of Progress corporate retreat down at the ranger station down there.
Any of you guys that are listening today are just curious about this specific hike, I would love to share more about it. I would highly recommend it. There's a safe, responsible way to do this hike, and it's a once in a lifetime experience just to be in this very raw, pure, part of the world. It's one of my favorite places. I definitely plan on going back again. So if anybody's interested and wants to learn a little bit more about Corcovado, feel free to reach out. I'd love to share some details and help you guys plan your trip if you guys decide to go down and check it out for yourselves.
If you're someone that loves poisonous snakes, poisonous spiders, jaguars, caiman, bull sharks, intense jungle, this might be for you. This might be the hike for you.
This might be your honeymoon, just that you don't know about yet. So, all right, guys. Well, really appreciate you guys letting me share that with you today, and looking forward to another episode next week. We got a couple really good topics that we've got planned out for the next couple of weeks. So we're looking forward to sharing that with you guys. And if you have any specific topics or just suggestions on things you would like us to cover in a future episode, including maybe even having you on as a guest, we would love the chance to talk to you and make that happen.
Okay. Well, everyone, until
right,
next
guys,
time,
have a great rest
week,
of your day.
and we'll
Thanks
talk to you
again
next
for
Friday.
listening to the Pursuit of Progress podcast.
The Pursuit of Progress.
See you guys.